Welcome to the Ducks Unlimited podcast, the only podcast about all things waterfowl. From hunting insights to science-based discussions about ducks, geese, and issues affecting waterfowl and wetlands conservation in North America, we bring the resource to you. The DU Podcast with your host, Dr. Mike Brazier.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining us on another special edition of the Ducks Unlimited podcast. We're bringing you some more information today. We record this on November 15th, on Friday, November 15th, where we are bringing you another special guest to talk about what we're hearing from some of our state waterfowl biologists, from some of the surveys that they're conducting about bird movements, bird numbers, sort of the status of migration throughout different parts of the country. And for this episode, we are joined by Aaron Yetter, Waterfowl Ecologist with the Forbes Biological Station, Illinois Natural History Survey, and he's going to share with us some results fresh off the press. Aaron, welcome to the DU podcast.
Well, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Aaron, tell us a little bit about the survey. Well, I guess first I'll say you are based out of Havana, Illinois, right?
That's correct.
Okay. And so tell us a little bit about the survey, this aerial waterfowl survey that we're going to talk about. How frequently is it conducted? How do you conduct it? And where is it conducted?
So we fly a cruise-style survey where we just fly around refuges of the Illinois River and Central Mississippi River from Grafton to up by the Quad Cities. And we fly once a week from September through the first week of January to determine waterfowl abundance on these surveys. We differ from other states such as Louisiana and Arkansas and Mississippi that fly line transect surveys. We have yet to be able to implement a statistically valid survey, so we just fly the traditional cruise-style surveys around the refuges.
And that cruise-style survey, we covered this a little bit with Larry when we had him on earlier this week. That cruise-style survey is basically you go to these areas where you've identified large concentrations of waterfowl that consistently have large concentrations of waterfowl, and you do your best to enumerate all of those birds. So you don't really need to extrapolate beyond that. You can extrapolate beyond that. These are an attempt to obtain a complete count of the birds within those defined survey areas, and so that's a key difference, right?
That's correct, and we've done the same thing, for the most part, the same wetlands that Frank Belrose started this survey in 1948. We've done the same thing for 71 years, now flying the same refuges, the same time of year, and almost the same aircraft for the last 40 years. So everything is standardized. There's only been 4 observers over this period that have done the surveys, and so we try to generate a trend instead of a population estimate.
That's a remarkable data set and a remarkable maintenance of a survey over such a long period of time. And we'll have you back on at some other point to discuss all of that in more detail and what that data set, that long record of data really is telling you about what you're seeing within those areas that you survey. So we'll look forward to that sometime in the future. But back to the survey at hand, you mentioned a couple of places that are just, for those that aren't familiar with Illinois, you said the survey is conducted on the Illinois River from Grafton up to the Quad Cities. Now, if I remember correctly, Grafton is there around St. Louis, right? And then Illinois River goes sort of northeast through the state and gets up close to Chicago. Is that, how close to Chicago do you get with this survey?
We're 100 or 150 miles west of Chicago. It's the big bend of the Illinois River at Hennepin. So the Illinois River survey goes from Hennepin down to Meredosia, which is near 50 miles north of the confluence of the Illinois and Mississippi River at Grafton. We commence up the Mississippi River, then from Grafton to just below Muscatine, Iowa, which is just below the Quad Cities or around the Quad Cities.
Well, let's get right into your results. Tell us what were some of the interesting observations you made yesterday, I guess it would be.
Well, we had as everyone in the Midwest, we had the major snowstorm, and on Armistice Day, Veterans Day on Monday, and temperatures plummeted from, I think we started out that morning about 35 degrees and plummeted to the next morning. The low was 5 degrees in Peoria, Illinois. So we had a major weather system move in, several inches of snow, and ensuing cold temperatures froze a lot of the wetlands, especially on the Illinois. And we had a departure of a pretty big number of the non-mallard dabbling ducks and some of the divers.
I noticed a Facebook post, I guess the Forbes Biological Station, with whom you work there, y'all have your own Facebook page, and you post these results, and you include quite a bit of a narrative around the results, and I think it might have been the previous survey results you talked about. Radar indicated movements of birds out of some of those areas around where you're doing the surveys, and you even referenced Dr. Ben O'Neill and his work to interpret some of that radar. And it's interesting that you did that because I took note of that because we had been on earlier in some of these episodes to talk about some of his urban mallard research. So that partnership that you guys have there, it's staying strong, and that's good to see. I'm looking at the results here, printout from the data yesterday, the survey yesterday, and one of the big takeaways for me when we're looking across this entire survey area, the number of mallards was estimated to be around 370,000. And if you go back a week prior to November, approximately a week prior on November 5th, date of the previous survey, total number of mallards that you counted in that survey region was 40,000. So you went from 40,000 all the way up to 370. Tell us what you think was, obviously the weather's driving some of that, but are there any other things that are happening up there that influencing those numbers?
Sure. Those numbers that you're talking about are from the Mississippi or Central Mississippi River region, and a big portion of those birds came from between Clarksville, Missouri, and St. Louis or Grafton, Illinois. And what happened was there was a movement of birds in with the weather pattern. We noticed more diving ducks last week or yesterday than we did the week before. So, and definitely more mallards. But I think one of the bigger things was that the Central's duck hunting zone in Missouri opened on Saturday, November 9th. And the recent high water that has been along the Mississippi has had all these mallards and ducks scattered around. And that opener forced the ducks out of those duck clubs and into the refuges where I normally fly. So I definitely think that we had a movement of birds in, but I think the bigger increase was the movement of birds out of the hunting areas into the refuges.
Are some of the survey regions along that you fly over or that you count, are they hunted, or are all of these refuges?
The areas that I fly are all refuges. Now they may have a hunting area adjacent to it. For instance, Ted Shank's conservation area in Missouri is hunted pretty extensively, but they designate portions of the area to as refuge, and so the birds will obviously stack up in those refuges, and very little bird abundance on the actual hunted areas because the hunters are in there every day.
Yeah, and do you count the non-sanctuary areas, or just this would reflect only those areas that are designated sanctuary? Am I understanding that right?
It kind of varies. Some of the national wildlife refuges, Clarence Cannon, for instance, there is no hunting on that refuge, so I count the entire area, fly the entire area. And some of the private duck clubs, they have like Darden and Quiver down in St. Charles County, Missouri. Those areas are private refuges and the hunting area adjacent to it. So once in a while, the ducks will spill out into the hunted areas, but for the most part, they're into the defined refuges.
Those ducks are pretty smart when it comes to figuring out where they get shot at and where they don't.
Yes, as Tom Mormon said the other day, he was that doesn't take them long to figure out where they have sanctuary and where they don't.
Aaron, as you were flying the survey, were there any other? I mean, obviously, we talked about the increase in mallards. Were there any noticeable decreases in other species or notable increases in other species that caught your eye, either while you were flying or after you put all the numbers together?
I haven't really reviewed the individual birds from last week. I would say we lost some ringneck ducks.
Probably some gadwall too, right?
Gadwall and pintails. Actually, pintails came up a little bit, but some of those fair weather, non-mallard dabblers, green-winged teal, widgeon, gadwall, shovelers departed for sure.
Yeah, I'm looking at some of the gadwall numbers here. They stayed about the same. So your gadwall stayed with you. What are you seeing in? Well, before I get to that, let me ask you: do you consider this, or do you expect this to be about the peak count that you would have, or do you think there's still a good number of birds north of you that are going to be making their way down?
We're hopeful that there are still a bunch of mallards up in the prairies, but I haven't heard reports, or I haven't followed Ducks Unlimited's migration reports enough to know. So we hope that there's more to come. Otherwise, we'll have some angry duck hunters for the remainder of duck season up here.
Well, it looks like there's a fair number of birds out there right now, and so hopefully it's well above the 10-year average, if I'm reading this correctly. So bird numbers out there should be fairly impressive. So what are you seeing, or what did you see with respect to the amount of ice that may be forming on some of these wetlands? I'm sure the rivers and streams are still open. What about some of the shallower water bodies? Are they starting to freeze up?
Yeah, so some of the areas where the river is connected to the backwaters, it's still open water habitat for the most part. Maybe a little bit of ice in the timber, but for the most part, the water's remaining open there. However, when you get into some of the more protected areas like Clarence Canyon Refuge is completely behind a big ag levee. It was 90% ice, and Delaire National Wildlife Refuge was also 90% ice. So that there was ice in a lot of places. We're about 40 degrees today here in central Illinois, and sunshine. So we're hoping that the ice is going to go away, but there were heard reports yesterday of 2 inches of ice at Emiquon, the Emiquon Preserve. So they were standing on the ice yesterday morning. So it's going to take a little bit of sun before we thaw out.
Yeah, and it's that time of year, certainly, where the temperature can vary and it can freeze a little bit at night, then it can thaw back out, and so you just kind of have to go through those fluctuations, and you have to take advantage of the good fortune when you can, and so y'all have some birds out there right now, so would encourage the hunters to make hay while they can.
That's right.
Aaron, I think that's going to wrap it up for this special episode. I want to thank you again for coming on and sharing some of your insights. We will keep a watch on the reports out of your surveys yet to come, and we'll probably try to reach out to you again and have you back on and discuss things later in the season.
All right. Well, we'll wait for the phone call.
All right. Thanks, Aaron.
Thank you very much.
Thanks again to our special guest today, Aaron Yetter, Waterfowl Ecologist with the Forbes Biological Station, Illinois Natural History Survey. I appreciate him coming on and sharing some insights from the recently completed survey up there in that state. We also thank our producer, Clay Baird, who does a fantastic job getting these podcasts turned around and posted in a timely manner for you to listen to. And we thank you, the listener, for your loyalty. We thank you for your passion and your commitment to wetlands and waterfowl conservation, and we look forward to catching you on the next edition of the podcast.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the DU Podcast. Be sure to rate, review, and subscribe to the show, and visit www.ducks.org/DU Podcast for resources based on today's topics, as well as access to more episodes. Opinions expressed by guests do not necessarily reflect those of Ducks Unlimited. Until next time, stay tuned to the Ducks.